There's no one answer in how to craft a good and compelling villain. A lot of it hinges on what the story requires, or more accurately, what kind of story the writer wants to tell. If you want a straightforward good versus evil story, you make the villain as evil and unlikable as possible, giving him or her motivations that make them unsympathetic or outright monstrous. We saw this recently, and quite frankly perfectly, with Vecna from Stranger Things Season 4. He was like nothing the characters had faced before, his motivations a complete mystery, but even when the truth is revealed about who he is and why he's doing what he's doing, he's still monstrous. He is by all means a pure representation of evil. But there's also the tragic and sympathetic villain. Villains that may not be pure evil, but are willing to do evil things to achieve a certain goal. They are often motivated by grief, tragedy, or revenge, sometimes both. Sometimes these types of villains get redemption arcs as the story progresses. Other times they're defeated, and we the audience kind of feel bad, even if their ultimate goal was mass murder. Yet on rare occasions, sometimes these villains are actually successful, mostly to build up for sequels. Because there are so many ways to craft a sympathetic villain, it's always hard to make a compelling one, or one that actually deserves sympathy but can still be considered a villain. Lately I've been hearing a lot of complaints that there are too many sympathetic villains in media. I believe that's because succeeding at making your villain sympathetic while still being villainous makes them more of a fleshed out character. But in the case of Vecna, his motivation is laid out. He has a history and a character, and yet even when we understand him, we still see him as a monster, completely beyond any redemption or sympathy. Thanos commits atrocities that make Hitler look like a Boy Scout, genociding planets, torturing people, wiping out half of all life in existence. Yet we also see hints of remorse and regret, and even an acknowledgement that what he's doing is evil, but that it's for the ultimate good, and has accepted the fact that people will hate him, but hopes that one day history will redeem him. Most MCU villains have just been two-dimensional baddies up to this point. Having one that had been built up for so long and having a bit of depth beyond just being evil for the sake of being evil. And because Thanos was such a big hit with audience, obviously other writers are trying to replicate his success. Whether the villain is sympathetic or non-sympathetic, the ultimate recipe for making a good villain is to give one with purpose for the story. For instance, Agatha Harkness from WandaVision seemed like an interesting character with a very interesting backstory, but we only ever found out about her existence to the end of the show, and even then she wasn't the main force causing the problems. If it actually had been her all along, maybe the show would have been a little bit better. I'm really not a fan of what direction they took Wanda's character, yet I do love the early half of WandaVision. Wanda works better as a hero than she does a villain. And while I believe mistakes were made with WandaVision, I think her handling in Doctor Strange was completely worse. Under a different direction, different circumstances, and maybe even a different motivation, maybe she could have been a good villain, a tragic hero turned to the dark side. Instead, they turned her into a megalomaniac that wants to abduct someone else's kids. So there is definitely risk when crafting a sympathetic villain and trying to tie it into your story. But when it can be pulled off, the results can be the creation of very interesting, compelling, and memorable characters. Thank you all for clicking and watching this video. Please remember to like and subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.